Hello, thanks for joining us. We're going to wait a few minutes here as we have others join into the conference, and then we'll get started. Our topic today will be focusing on the cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance in 2022, leveraging the Synoptek Secures model. All right, now that we've had a chance to let some folks join into the meeting, figured we'd get started on our topic today. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be, again, as I mentioned, talking about cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance in 2022, leveraging the Synoptic Secures model. As we go through this discussion today, please feel free to submit questions through the chat. We will have a Q&A section at the end, and we would really like to have this as interactive as possible. We'll also have a few poll questions as we're going through, so we look forward to your feedback. Uh, Jumping in, I'm Eric Westrom. I'm the Vice President of our Business Infrastructure Solutions Group here at Synoptic, overseeing our cloud security, infrastructure performance, and workforce productivity practices. And with me today is Chris Gebhardt. And Chris, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. So Chris Gebhardt here, based out of Salt Lake City. Pleasure to meet everybody, and looking forward to some good interaction later on. So I'm the CISO for Synoptic. I also oversee the cybersecurity practice, which is all of our customer-facing components of cybersecurity, compliance, and all those fun things. And looking forward to chatting with everybody today on how the Synoptic secures and what we've seen for what we think we're seeing coming up for 2022.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So today, here's our agenda. Is pretty straightforward here, but we want to make sure that there's first of all just a clear understanding around cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance. I think that we'll find that there's not always a common definition. So Chris will run us through some of that as we go through. Um, what's changed in this post-pandemic world? As we've kind of seen a lot of different changes, right, between just how we interact with our systems, where we're working from, and then just some of the other interesting things that have popped up as things go around. We'll talk about a case study as we go through and walk through the understanding of our secures framework and talk about some assessments as we go through. So, um, just a little bit about Synoptic, in case you're not aware. So, Synoptic is a global systems integrator and managed IT services provider. And we work with many organizations worldwide to help them navigate the ever changing technology landscapes and build some solid foundations for their businesses and meet their business goals. We have comprehensive offerings that span several different pillars that we have here. It could be business applications such as Microsoft Dynamics, SAP, and the like there. Workforce productivity. So, as we think of collaboration platforms, Teams, Zoom, Office 365, going down that angle, product development. So, full scale application development, application management as we go through cybersecurity, which is obviously the topic that we're talking about today, infrastructure performance. So our core, um, just normal things that you would think about around servers, networks, all the other kind of standard IT infrastructure items that we've been dealing with since for decades, actually. Here, cloud advancement, helping not only enact change and migrations into cloud platforms, establishing your cloud strategy, whether that be a hyperscaler, a multi-cloud approach, or even just still going to a dedicated private cloud type of environment. We have services around there, and data insights, pulling all of those business drivers together, giving you insight into your different systems, the data you need to make decisions in the day-to-day business life, and all of that wrapping together with our IT leadership and management capabilities, uh, providing true business level leadership and IT leadership to help formulate any sort of IT roadmaps and other business strategies that align to help you with your revenue growth, or whatever the particular business growths are. Um, so with that, we do focus across multiple verticals and have some very key strategic partnerships with Microsoft and AWS and the others. But let's jump into the content here. So, right before we get started on this particular slide, we do have a poll question. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. So please go ahead and take a chance to answer that. So, we're just curious, does your organization have a better security posture than 2029 in the pre-pandemic world, or maybe it's not? So with
2019.
that,
2019.
2019, sorry, one of those years.
No
It's been so
kidding.
long.
Yeah.
Uh, so, we've found that there's often confusion amongst our customers around the three terms, right, that we've talked about here. So Chris, how would you define these and position them for an organization?
Yeah, it is a bone of contention with a lot of people is we start talking about things and we just make assumptions based on words that we hear. That's a really big problem in cybersecurity as a whole. So for us, we look at these three terms as this pyramid structure where cybersecurity are kind of the tools that you use to firm up your infrastructure and your protection protocols and all that fun stuff. And that forms the basis, the core of this pyramid. It's the foundation, right? I've heard this analogy many times in life applied to other things. So it's such a natural analogy. We borrowed it for this discussion, and you can see here how once you have that firm cybersecurity base, then you build your privacy controls into play. And then finally comes compliance. And what I tell folks is you really can't talk about compliance, those, things like regulatory compliance, legal compliance, even framework compliance, like things to ISO that are not necessarily backed by a government agency, for example. You really can't talk about those until you have this firm cybersecurity base in place, right? You don't want to build your house on a weak foundation, and that's exactly where this comes from. So for us, cybersecurity, firewalls, policies, PMP, cybersecurity is people as well. It's a big factor that we need to take into account. Training, right? Testing, making sure that we're sample fishing our users to test their abilities. And then we talk about privacy. Okay, now how do we protect that protected health information, for example, in the healthcare world? What are our data protection strategies that we're using? Do we have good data protection in place? And then finally, okay, now we know we've got good cybersecurity, we know we got good privacy. Now let's go out and prove that, right? Let's go out and show the world that we are doing these things effectively, and that's where things like ISO 27001 come into place. So taking this bottom up approach is great. At the same time, you do have to think about compliance early on as you're building out an organization or changing an organization to say, where do I want to go? What road do I want to go down? But trying to say, hey, we're just going to go get an ISO, certification today without having that strong cybersecurity and privacy foundation is just a recipe for disaster, unfortunately. So, and having those terms, understood now and in this context, we can go forward with what we're going to talk about, and you're going to see this pyramid. And I'm going to talk about this pyramid again towards the end and say how this all wraps up nice and neatly into a tight little package.
All right, great, thank you. So let's. I thought it'd be a great time to just review that poll question that we have here before we kind of jump into what's changed in the post-pandemic world. Um, Interestingly enough, only a third of you said that your security posture has improved since 2019. 66% of you, the rest of you, there were no no's, but 66% of you said that you're not sure, which is it's very interesting that some of that maybe corporate culture or information hasn't necessarily been disseminated amongst your organizations. I think it's very important, and Chris, you probably agree with me that having a corporate culture of security is extremely important, and
Paramount.
keeping everyone advised on what's been done and what's going on and what we need to do to play our part is extremely critical. So, you know, looking at what's changed in the post-pandemic world, I think we all know the remote story, right? So the kind of first bullet point here, studies have shown that at least a quarter of the workforce could work from home between 3 and 5 days a week going forward. That has some major implications on how we interact with our systems, the original security controls that were built, because a lot of those were built based off of perimeter security for specific offices, different things like that. That certainly will change in the wake of all of this. Um, More interesting and kind of aligning to the poll that we had here is 81% of the executives that took part in an Ernst& Young Global Information Security Survey in 2021 said that COVID-19 forced them to bypass security processes, including basic cybersecurity hygiene. Yikes.
Scary.
Chris, yeah, what do you think of
Scary.
that, Chris?
That gives me shivers.
Right. So, and with everything going on in the world, with the cyber attacks and just the big money making machine that it is now for the ransomware folks, we should always be considering adding more layers and making it more complicated for them to do their job as opposed to bypassing those things. So, this hybrid approach that we're taking now with the workforce has definitely increased complexity on how you protect these environments. Chris will definitely walk through ways to check that and some of the controls that need to be in place to ensure that you're protected the best that you can be. And this has also created a ripe new field around cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So, how do you respond to that in a distributed environment? Uh, and then, lastly, um, this is a really good opportunity just to rethink the strategy as we go through and approach these things. So, go ahead, Chris. You want to say
Yeah,
something?
so I mean, we're even seeing this, this is all 2019, 2020 type of information, right? Post-pandemic, pandemic. Now we're seeing something new on the world stage that's impacting cybersecurity, and that's obviously the Russia-Ukraine. What's going on over there, and it's impacting security. If you think about security, privacy and compliance, that goes down to your supply chain as well. Knowing where your vendors are located, knowing what impacts they're going to have. Ukraine was a centerpiece for software development. Hundreds and thousands of software developers are based in the Ukraine, and companies were relying on them, and now they're having to, think about that. So you have to have your, even though it's not, hitting most of the folks on this call, but it's still a BCP, business continuity plan you need to think about. Say, what happens if we lose our development team in Ukraine? What happens if we lose our antivirus vendor, for example, Kaspersky, who's a big Russian, antivirus, fantastic company, fantastic service, but it's definitely something we need to think about into these changing parameters that we're seeing for 2022 as well. So this gets real fast.
Yeah, definitely. So, speaking of that real fast, and some of the things that we need to do to ensure that the maturity levels are there and whatnot. So, as I'm going to pop another live poll up here, just very curious for the audience that's in attendance. uh, Looking at security controls that are in place, how many controls are there in the NIST 853 security and privacy controls for information systems? Just curious how much everyone knows about this and where we think these things are aligned. And
Yeah,
while
it's
you're
nice.
answering, oh, go ahead.
It's a nice question because a lot of us talk about NIST guidelines. A lot of companies want to be measured against NIST guidelines, and, until they actually dive in and realize what's involved. So I'm curious about the output, what we're going to see here from folks guessing on this. Really looking forward to it.
Right. And so while everyone's having a chance to answer that, I did run through kind of our capability maturity model that we have here. So at Synoptek, one of our uh, kind of core tenets here is to ensure that our customers can meet a base level of maturity in the IT operations space. And then that also kind of ties into security. But As you can, it'd be interesting for you to self rank yourselves on this chart as well. But quite often, when we come into an organization, people are either in a level 0 or level 1, maybe kind of traversing in between those. But there's a lot of um, either chaotic or just ad hoc type of things that are in place. A lot of the project budgeting or roadmaps are more reactive. You may have project level budgeting, but a lot of times some of the other maturity pieces in order to make really strong decisions aren't necessarily in place. So, metrics and KPIs, are you measuring the different aspects of your business? Do you have SLAs internally for response times and how you handle the different business units for your internal customers and external? Formal policies, having project-centric governance, and having defined and repeatable processes. And I'm reading out of the level 2 because that's the level that we see as the minimum that people need to be able to get to in order to kind of maintain a healthy and functional organization. So along with that, there is kind of a breach um, level of maturity that we want to have in there. So Chris, I don't know if you want to go ahead and talk about that a little bit here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like maturity model concept because it recognizes that each company is different, right? When you go to your doctor, you're different than the previous patient they've seen, and they have to treat you uniquely. And this is the same concept here for maturity model. A 2-year-old organization can be way more mature than a 50-year-old organization. It really depends on what process they put in place, what practices they have, et cetera, et cetera. So when we looked at this, when I saw this, I really liked it. The new DoD model for cybersecurity is following this called CMMC. So if you hear CMMC, just recognize it is a maturity model, and you're getting kind of this overview today from it. So when I looked at it, I said, okay, what does security look like in here? We've got this people and process and technology tabs, but what would security look like? And we want to take the organization, as Eric hinted, from the left to the right. Right, the left is an immature organization that's very susceptible, and in our case for security, they've probably already been hacked or they're hackable. Right, they've just thrown stuff out there. They haven't really hardened it. They haven't put any security behind it, et cetera, et cetera. But as we move them to the right, the level and the sophistication of the attacker and the attacks changes and gets more complex. And that's what we want. As Eric said, level 2 organizations, that's our ideal target, initial target. We want to get organizations to level 4 because you've seen numerous ransomwares. Almost every week, a new ransomware comes up for not just mom and pop shops, not just SMB, small market, small medium businesses. No, we're talking major corporations are now being subjected to this. So, and then level 3, you get into the more sophisticated actors, the nation state actors. So when you think about this, you really are trying to be more secure than your neighbor, in that a nation state actor, even a ransomware gang, is not going to spend 5 months trying to hack your environment that's super sophisticated, that is good. You've got all the practices in, you've got MFA, you check all those boxes. They're going to go and find other low hanging fruit because they're going to ransom 5 other companies in those 5 months rather than spending all of that time on you. Right. So they're going to improve their profits. It's a criminal enterprise. We have to recognize that for what it is. Therefore, you just need to be better than your neighbor. If your neighbor doesn't have an alarm system and you do, and you have signs posted for that effect, do you think a burglar is going to go to your house versus your neighbor's house? It's a weird concept to really think about it, but it makes some sense there. Ideally, we want to get you to Synoptek Secures level 4 of security, where we feel very confident that an attacker. There's almost no way an attacker is going to get to you, or it's going to cost so much for them to get to you that it's not going to be feasible for them. So that's how security falls into this maturity model, and there's some interesting studies that have been done about costs around this.
So, Chris, what would you say? An attack, is it worth it just paying the ransom or putting your
Oof,
money in an investment to be protected?
oof. That's do we pay ransom? That's a huge discussion
Mhm.
amongst academics, amongst lawyers. Are you violating certain international laws if you pay a ransom, et cetera, et cetera? But you have to look at what is cost, right? Is a ransom cheap to pay to get your data back and get your organization online? These are conversations that the company needs to have early in the dialogue. You can't have it afterwards. You can't have it after you're attacked. You need to have a tabletop exercise where you talk this through with your executive team to understand what is going to be our playbook if this happens. And also recognizing that if you're going to pay the ransom, and you get ransomware, you're going to probably pay the ransom, and you're going to pay for all of the security controls that you should have had in place to begin with. So you're actually paying twice. Instead, organizations should look at embracing paying once. Prepay that ransom by investing in your own organization, but also recognize that it's not just about money. It comes down to reputation. You think about these companies that have been breached and ransomed and all this other stuff. Uh, we don't look at them the same way. When Equifax hit, when the Equifax hack hit, 5 days before that, we would have had a completely different view of Equifax than we did afterwards. It's showcased in their stock. So you have these other costs that an organization is impacted by, and certain times I've seen situations where companies had to go out of business because they couldn't
Yeah.
afford the reputation loss. The money was fine; they had insurance, they had all that, but no one wanted to do business with them anymore. Boom, they had to
So,
lock up.
so what do you think about that Ernst and Young study then that shows that many people actually bypass their controls?
Yeah, it's just what you don't want to do in today's day and age, right? There's so many attackers out there trying to get us from so many different aspects. And when I say us, I just mean everybody, right? It's
Right.
not a US versus other. No, this is global. We've seen attacks last week in Japan. We've seen attacks all over the world. So it is it's the us versus them is all of us on this call versus all the bad guys that hopefully are not on the call.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you see the big news headlines around an organization that got hit. Uh, Chances are that there were probably dozens of other organizations got hit on the same day, and that's just the one that made the news.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly. They're the biggest one.
right. All right. So, moving towards then the controls and the framework, right, that we have around here, just to kind of tie this back to the poll question that we had out there. How many controls are out there? So, 20% of you thought that there are about 52 controls. 289 thought there, or sorry, 40% thought there were 289, and 40% thought there are over 1,000. And the truth of the matter is there are over 1,000 different privacy controls that are out there under that particular NIST framework. So, Chris, since there's so many out there, what can we do to kind of simplify that a bit? And as we talk about our framework here,
Yeah, NIST 853, it's the granddaddy of controls for security and privacy. So rightfully so, it should have. They're trying to address everything, right? They're trying to address every organization that's out there. So it has 1,100, 1,200 different control objectives in it, which is, an almost insurmountable task if you want to make your organization NIST 853 compliant. That's a whole different discussion how to go about that. There are structured ways of doing it. But even so, 1,000 controls is a lot to ingest. What we looked at was say, you know what, for an organization to be mature, there's a couple things have to happen. Um, they have to be able to embrace that. So it has to be practical and reasonable. Those controls have to be practical and reasonable for the organization. It's nice to have the cool stuff. It's nice to have monitors on the wall that show those pew pew maps of where your attacks are coming from. But do they really make the organization more secure? So when we looked at this, we said, okay, organizations are coming to us as their subject matter expert in cybersecurity, asking, how do I get secure? We didn't have a very concise answer for them. So that's where the idea of secures came about. They said, look, if you do nothing else, here are the 7 domains to focus on, and here are the 34, 35 control objectives that we think you need to have. And we'll go through some of these and talk about specifics. But as you're looking at this chart on the right, the secures maturity model, don't read it from left to right necessarily, but look from top to bottom, right? So Eric said earlier, we want organizations to get to a level 2 aspect. So if you see the level 2 column there, as a maturity model, things are cumulative, meaning in order to be level 2, you have to be doing the things at level 1. So here in our surveillance domain, you can see, okay, at level 2, I need to be doing asset inventory. I need to know what's on my network, but I also need to be doing monitoring my domain, doing some footprinting, what others can see about me, make sure I have a security information and event management tool in place. And then you can go down and go down and go down. As we come down to the bottom domain here, the supplements domain, you can see it's kind of weighted more towards level three, level four side, because when you look at what those items are, for example, compliance, audits, policy procedure, compliance readiness, those are all at the top of that pyramid. And remember, we have to have a strong foundation of cybersecurity before we can get to those compliance tools. That's why they're at level three and level four. They're for organizations that already have the level one, level two, that foundation in place. So being able to understand it like that really makes perceiving this chart much easier, and much easier to talk about with other folks in the organization that may not have a security slant to their experience, to their knowledge. Presenting this to the board, that makes it a very simplistic way for them to understand it, without having 3 hours of background in what cybersecurity really is and going forward. So,
Okay.
with that, we'll jump into a few more. Eric, you have anything on that? I'll throw it back to you
No,
real
I
quick.
think just because we're getting pressed on time here, I think we should start stepping through some of these things, and really focusing kind of on the level one as that baseline that you talked about. The kind of the minimum level that every organization should be at. So, just as a clarifying thing, so Chris, as I understand it, each one of these sections or the domains that you have here, like surveillance domain, all of these items that you have listed are tying back to different controls, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So the domain really is just the focal area, and in this case, we said surveillance. You start with an acronym, and you start with a word, and you work back to try and find the acronym. It's like, okay, what could S be? You have that whiteboard of all these different things that it could be, and surveillance seemed to make sense here, to say what are we doing as an organization to see what we can see, and more importantly, what the bad guys can see. So that's why you see things like footprinting the environment, being sure that, hey, someone has gone out and pulled up Shodan and pulled up census. What do those? They're scanners. They're public accessible scanners that scan the internet 24/7. They scour it. They visit your site. They're looking and they document all of the machines that you have exposed to the internet. So that's what footprinting involves, is making sure you have a good idea of what others know about your environment, and you take those things offline or you protect them heavily. So that's where these types of different domains, and you see we've got an email domain and we've got a user domain, and we'll hint through some of these real fast. But asset inventory here is our level one control. You need to know what's on your network. If I'm the bad guy and I'm coming into your environment, I always tell people, what would Chris do? Right? Because I'm going to come in and I'm going to look around. I'm going to see, hey, can I drop a Raspberry Pineapple somewhere in your environment, plug it into an Ethernet port where you won't see it? It's behind a desk. It's in a waiting room. It's in a conference room where I have access to. So those are the type. And then do you know about it? How fast do you get notified that that device is brand new on your network? Right. That's what asset inventory focuses on. That partners very well with the SOC and SIM monitoring to make sure that, hey, when this alert is generated, someone sees it and someone takes action on it. So um, that's our surveillance. We'll jump ahead here to our next one. I'm going to try and pop through these pretty quick. Obviously, we have a white paper that we can make available to anybody that wants to see it. You can go to the Synoptic website, download it. It actually talks about every single thing on here, and goes into a paragraph or two of detail. It's not a 50-page thesis on Synoptic Secures. I think it's maybe 12 or 15 pages, but it gives you a good overview. I highly encourage you, if this intrigues you, to go out to the website and grab the white paper and review it. Feel free to share it with folks in your organization as well. So here, endpoint, another big component. Now, these are not in any specific type of order. I want to stress that. That just because E matches the E for secures. It could have very well, we could have moved email to this and endpoint to the end, right? So they're not in order. Don't take anything from that. But everything on here is just as important in the level one, level two environment. So yeah, we're looking for obvious things: antivirus, anti-malware. Folks, it's 2022. If you don't have AV and AM in in your environment, we have a bigger conversation. And on the next slide, we'll talk about what I think is the biggest one for you. But we're looking to see encryption and backup. Encryption super important nowadays. Probably the second, third most important thing out of everything here in secures. So make sure you've got that, and let's get through. Let's make sure we've all got that. Going into our cyber domain, gets into more of the strategy side of it. Okay, making sure that you do have a subject matter expert or VCSO. This is just a service Synoptic provides. Many organizations, MSSPs, provide this service to companies, giving you that fractional, right, subject matter expert at your disposal that you can use. Ideally, here we want to make sure we're asking, do you have someone in your organization that has sole responsibility over cybersecurity rather than that fractional or dispersed responsibility? Or, oh, well, Bob has responsibilities for this and Ann has responsibilities for that. No, we want to see one person that can strategize when we're talking this type of cyber domain. Users, super important. Just being able to embrace your users, making sure that training isn't too overwhelming. There's a fine balance there, but also testing them, making sure that hey, the training is sticking. They're not clicking on things they shouldn't be clicking on, et cetera, et cetera. Out of everything here in this whole conversation today, the only one thing I hope everyone will take away is that MFA is the most important thing on anything we're talking about. This is the number one. I know I said they're not in any order, but for me, MFA is number one. Microsoft and a couple of other organizations did studies, and they determined that 99% plus of all the attacks that happened in like 2019 and 2020 would have been prevented if MFA had been in place. So please, I beg you, talk to your organizations about putting MFA in everywhere. So what do you think about that, Eric?
Well, I agree with you that that's definitely one of the most hot critical priority items that needs to be in there. I was just wanted to circle back on this again, just kind of to the poll question that we started out with around security posture, and with two-thirds of you not knowing if you were in a stronger place, pre-pandemic versus now. you know, Again, with the user education and ensuring that everybody has a culture of security that's wrapped around there, just wanted to really reiterate that it's important for your security organization or just your leadership to ensure that they're communicating that posture and those responsibilities all the way around to all the staff. So that way, you know, just that culture is embedded into everyone.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And here at Synoptic, it's a great cybersecurity culture because it starts with the CEO. We were on a even this morning we were on a call, Eric and I, and the CEO was talking about how cybersecurity is so important to not only Synoptic but to our customers and how already for all of our customers. So it's that type of culture that really breeds protection and protects the organization. So highly encourage everyone to you definitely get their board, their executive team, talking about it as much as possible. Um, so from users, we go into things like our remediation stage. Another super important one, as Eric mentioned earlier about vulnerabilities. I'm going to kick it over to him here for some comment as well on this. Um, did my mic switch? Uh-oh, sounds like I have a problem. Good.
Well, we can still hear you. You're just a little more echoey.
Oh, interesting. Go ahead
Go
and,
ahead and proceed, though.
okay. Yeah, so vulnerability is super important. It's This is how bad guys are getting in, right? They're looking across the environment. They're trying to see, what's out there. Log4j, key example. Big vulnerability that was released, and within days, malicious actors were trying to take advantage of it. So having effective vulnerability, another key aspect of secures. And as you can see, as we've gone through some of these already, we're not talking about bells and whistles. We're talking about fundamentals for security. And this is what we like to see in organizations to have these. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Oh, absolutely. Vulnerabilities. Not only is it important to understand that they're there and to discover them, but it's also important to have processes in place to remediate those, uh, because vulnerabilities are inevitable. Those will happen, whether it's just through coding. All right, manufacturers and software developers put out their upgrades for their feature sets, things like that, and we always see the bugs that are out there. So
Yep.
uh, incredibly important to ensure that not only do you have a way to identify those things, but you have a plan to address them.
That's key, right? I mean, yeah, we have them. Well, that's great. how
Yeah.
what are you doing to fix those things? Knowing your problem, the bad guys know your problem too. So the other thing real fast on here is pen testing. You'll hear this mentioned. A lot of organizations talk about pen testing, and as we went over cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance, what those mean, these two terms, vulnerability assessment and pen testing, should never be used synonymously. They are not. They are completely different. A vulnerability goes after known threats in your environment. A pen test goes after what you don't know. And pen test is generally human driven. We look at all sorts of things. Again, it comes down to that. What would Chris do to break into my network? Right. That's how a pen test should be. So our next one, email. Real fast, we can go through this one. You need to have email protection in place. It's not just great putting out an email server. There's a lot of phishing starts, and there's a lot of ways to protect phishing through email, phishing and whaling. So we want to see a bunch of these things in place, and then data loss protection for the compliance side of things. As we get into that privacy and compliance tier of the pyramid, we definitely want to talk about DLP protections. But you can see that's why it's at level 4. It's not an entry level. Again, it's that sophisticated climbing up the pyramid aspect here. Supplements are big on level 3, right? But as well as quite important if you're eventually trying to get to that compliance structure and getting to that ISO 27001 certification, the SOC 2 Type 2 attestation, any of those things. If you're in healthcare, you're trying to do a high trust certification. That's where all of these are paramount to your success there. Do they contribute strongly to the cybersecurity bottom line? Not necessarily, but they do contribute to that holistic cybersecurity organization. So definitely want you to think about a lot of these tools that are on here, understanding what they are, how to move forward, and you'll notice policy and procedures are level 1. Right. We definitely want to see organizations have strong policies in effect. When we come into an organization and we start auditing them and doing a roadmap review with them, we said, okay, tell me about your policy for passwords. Well, we really don't have one. Okay, well, we need one. We need to understand. We need to let our users know what is acceptable to the organization. We need to set that tone. So, and policy, I want to stress to everybody on the call. I've seen I've seen this go good and I've seen this go really bad. Most of the times it goes really bad, right? You get this policy manual, it's in a 3-inch binder, 150-page PDF. That's not good, folks. No one's going to read it, right? You want policy to be concise. You want it to be simplistic so that everyone can understand it and they don't have to reference and spend 5 days trying to understand it. So, highly recommend whittling down your policy to just what's needed. Less is more in the sense of what policy looks like. And here we're back to our pyramid. You can kind of see, having gone through secures, how it tracks, to this pyramid and how that foundation layer is so important to getting to that level 3, level 4, that climb up the pyramid to this compliance side of things. Let's talk about case study, Eric. What do you think?
I think it'd be great. So we find this all the time. So we have clients that didn't know where to start. So what do you think, or how do you think we should approach that in most cases? And what have we found in some of these engagements that we go through?
Yeah, so um, this is a consolidated case study from a bunch of different customers, and I like it because it really speaks the truth of how this has been so important. The amount of feedback we're going to go over what our you can see here conducting a security health check for the organization. Basically, the security health check is we just go through the synoptic. We follow the synoptic secures framework. We ask these targeted questions. Hey, tell me about your MFA. What are you using? How is it impacted? How many systems have it? Right? It's not meant to be this really super sophisticated security profile and roadmap where it's a 2-3 month engagement and we're getting down into the weeds. But just from following secures, just those 34 control objectives, we're able to help organizations identify weaknesses that they may have known about or they didn't even realize that they had. And the nice thing is it's presented and our findings are presented to the organizations here to say, look, here it's very simplistic, it's non-technical. right? We don't want it to be super technical because we want it to be shared with the board of directors and the executive team to say, hey, here's what you need to understand. And more importantly, here's why we need to do this. If we don't do it, here are the consequences. I don't like fear, uncertainty, and doom marketing, but I do like reality. And it's like, hey, here's reality. If you don't implement MFA, here's how you're susceptible to take over, right? For many of our organizations, and this one was a key. We moved them from an O365 license to an M365 license. They didn't even realize that existed, right? And there's a big difference between the O365 licensing and the M365 licensing. Microsoft is, super complicated company. They provide amazing services, but they have a lot of those services. So understanding the differences, we were able to come in and go, hey, for the price you're paying for your O365 subscription, as well as the cost you're paying for all of these other third-party products, then you can consolidate to an M365 solution, have a single pane of glass, which is a target in the security world, to say, here's everything you need, and it's all in one place. You can control it from one dashboard. One team can control it. You don't need multiple teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to do that. So we've seen numerous examples of these occur throughout our process of doing the SHC. We got great feedback from customers and a lot of huge success stories there. So cool. Eric, you have some poll results for us, I hear.
Well, no, I have a poll question.
Oh,
So
poll question, even
just
better.
as we're just as we're wrapping this up, and when we're getting ready, and Chris will talk through this last little slide here a bit, but which of the domains that we've talked about in our secures framework is most important to you? We did combine the endpoint and users together since those happen to be closely related, but it'd be very interesting to see where that lands with the audience here.
Yeah, there's
So
no right or wrong answer to this one. This is all subjective to you.
correct. And so while we're waiting for those results there, Chris, what do you think about just wrapping up here with the maturity model assessments that we have going through, and how's that look?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the end result of this webinar is, we're sharing the Synoptic Secures framework that we developed with you. Like I said, the white paper's out there. This is it's a continuing evolving process as well. We will add things to this. I doubt we'll subtract anything, but we'll certainly add things as new threats, new threat vectors are identified. But what we do is we help organizations digest this. You mentioned earlier, you may not have the SMEs in place all across the board, or your SMEs, we need help from an outside organization looking in and say, hey, how can we embrace this secures? I know we've got some weaknesses. I've been screaming from the top of the roof about it. I need someone else to come in and document this for me. And that's where our security health check really comes into play. I love doing these because it's a conversation. It's not an interrogation with your team. It's a conversation to say, tell me about this. Let's understand. So we do that in a series of two meetings with you and your team. The first meeting is the technical side, right? Where we're asking those probing questions of tell me about MFA, how you're using it, et cetera, et cetera. And then the second follow-up meeting is where I get to go through secures and explain how it rates in your environment, and give you what we tried to be an objective measure based on a weighted platform. You can see on the far right there where we talk about the weighted maturity rating. So, not all of these things are equal, right? Level one, and as Eric mentioned earlier, level two is where we want to get organizations to as a baseline, right? So, level one and level two controls to us have more weight, they're more important. They build that cybersecurity foundation of that pyramid. As we move to level three, level four, those controls are important, but they just don't have as much weight. So that's why we come up with this maturity rating, and then we give the weighted maturity rating. So, in this case, you can see this example 3.5, 3.8. To me, that says, hey, this organization had more level one, level two controls in place than they had overall. So that's what we like to see. Again, it's all in plain English. We don't use technical babble in our presentation back to the organization for these types of assessments. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen some phenomenal success, with this process. Um,
Great. Well,
but
thank
I'm
you, Chris,
curious.
for
I'm curious to see what the poll results are. Fill me in. Fill
yeah.
me in.
So from the poll result perspective, 100% of the respondents chose the cyber domain as it relates
I
to security profile and roadmaps and vCISO and things like that. So um,
like this group.
Yeah. So with that, we're at the end of our time here, and I did want to give an opportunity if there were any questions for us to be able to respond to a couple of those for you. But Chris, thank you very much for walking through the Secures framework with us and really highlighting the differences between security, compliance, and privacy. So if there are any questions, feel free to put those in. I'd be happy to answer those for you. So there's a question. Have any of your clients suffered a security breach in the recent past? How did you manage that breach and what did you learn from the incident?
Nope, we're all good. I'd love to say that, but you can't. There's no security provider on the planet that can say that. It's just the bad guys are sadly good at their job. You may have heard the adage, we have to be right 100% of the time. They have to be right 1% of the time in order to breach an organization. So yes, we've helped our clients, deal with breaches, deal with security incidents and events. And there's a big difference between those, by the way. Highly encourage folks to research the difference between definition of security event and security incident, especially if you're following the NIST framework. Very, very instrumental differences there. But you know, one of the things that we have learned and what we've seen is MFA was lacking, just like Microsoft says. Every single breach I've been part of for the past many years, MFA was not in place. Now, MFA is not the panacea. Don't get me wrong. There's still creative ways, believe it or not, that bad guys are using to quasi circumvent MFA, but it certainly reduces dramatically the possibility there. And so definitely, the good thing is we've been able backups are better nowadays. We've been able to get organizations back up to speed faster because we've thought about it ahead of time, and that's where something like Secures comes into play because we have a backup capability here in Secures. We asked them about. Organizations that have that more mature rating recover much faster if ever breached to begin with. So
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. We have a second question. Are the 7 domains and 34 high-level controls specified in Secures enough to truly secure an enterprise ecosystem?
no, absolutely not. I'd be lying if I said yes, they were, right? They are the best effort forward, right? We follow best practices in our industries. We think these are the best practices, minimum best practices an organization needs to be secure. Will an organization that is 100% compliant with secures get breached? Yeah, potentially. You always have human elements, you always have configuration mistakes. Um, but being going down this path definitely ensures a better profile for you as an organization. More importantly, being able to demonstrate compliance to these 34 control objectives, what we've heard from insurance companies actually reduces your liability and reduces your premiums that you pay. We've been in conversations with a few cybersecurity insurers where we shared this with them, and their comment was, "Hey, if you can bring us any customer on here that is a 3 or 4, we'd love to insure them because it reduces their losses in the future." So
Great. Thank you for answering that. I think that was a question on everybody's mind, especially when we see there's over 1,000 controls. So definitely good to have that. Um, so have you ever come across any zero-day exploits, and how common are those nowadays?
yeah, it's a great question. You hear a lot of talk about that. The name has unfortunately been taken out of context a lot, and misused. But a zero-day exploit, for those not familiar, is something that has not been released necessarily to the vendor. There's a side definition of that that says a zero-day exploit the vendor knows about but hasn't patched. Right. For me, if it's a zero-day exploit, it means it came out today. And the clock starts ticking, so it's only a 0 day today and becomes a 1 day tomorrow. Um, then it becomes a 2 day, then it becomes a 3 day, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Right.
but no, they are certainly out there. Log4j was a big one that hit in December. And for some reason, these 0 days always hit on a Friday. I don't know why. I think it's just to mess with cybersecurity teams on weekend plans. But yeah, they're certainly out there. There's certainly something to be concerned about for sure. But that's where patching and vulnerability assessment is so critical. And you can do mitigating controls. When Log4j hit, while there weren't patches right away, there were very easy mitigating controls to hit where you just block that at the firewall level, right? So if you had an impacted server on your back end, the firewall was protecting it by not letting any of the specific queries that triggered Log4j go through. Right. So it's not necessarily a patch, but it is a mitigating control.
Got it. Well, thank you for all
Good
the
time.
questions that came from the audience. We really appreciate those. The good, definitely thought provoking, and probably questions that everybody had that maybe we're afraid to ask. So that's good. Lastly, I will ask Chris one last question here. But Chris, if somebody was interested in a security health check or something like that, how would they engage us for that?
Yeah, I mean, reach out to me, reach out to you as well, right? Reach out on our website. We're happy to help there. Like I said, it's a pretty low impact but super valuable assessment. My email address, and you'll have our contact information from the presentation that our team will send out to you. We're happy to help with that. If you have an existing Synoptic contact, reach out to them and say, hey, how do I schedule an SHC for my organization? And we can get that going for you.
Awesome. Thank you. And so thank you everyone for joining. Sorry we ran, about 5 or 6 minutes over here, but we really appreciate your attendance and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Take care, everybody.
Bye.